First up, a word from our sponsor of this session, Ann Cabrera from SWCA Environmental Consultants. Ann.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from lunch. Thank you to everyone who made this possible. My name is Ann Cabrera, and I'm honored to be here on behalf of SWCA, and we are thrilled to be sponsoring SCDRP and supporting this vital gathering of professionals and experts dedicated to enhancing disaster resilience in our communities. At SWCA, our mission is to bring sound science and creative solutions to global environmental challenges, which aligns perfectly with the goals of SCDRP and is why we are so proud to be a sponsor of this event. Our core values of collaboration, continuous learning, striving for excellence, and giving back to the community resonate deeply with the objectives of this partnership. Today, I have the privilege of introducing Session 3, our co-benefits, permitting of living shorelines, nature-based solutions, and nearshore coastal armoring. This session is particularly close to our hearts as it embodies the innovative and sustainable approaches that are critical to our work. Nature-based solutions are essential to our efforts to build resilience against the impacts of climate change and natural disasters. These solutions not only protect our coastlines, but also enhance biodiversity, improve water quality, and provide recreational opportunities for our communities. They represent a harmonious integration of human ingenuity with the natural environment, creating systems that are both resilient and beneficial to the ecosystem. We believe the future of environmental management lies in these sustainable and adaptive approaches. By promoting and implementing nature-based solutions, we can achieve multiple co-benefits that extend beyond mere protection. These solutions help us to restore natural habitats, support local economies, and foster a deeper connection between people and the environment. Permitting these innovative projects can be complex, but it's a challenge that we embrace. Navigating the regulatory landscape to implement nature-based solutions requires collaboration, expertise, and a commitment to sustainability. It is through sessions like this that we can share knowledge, discuss best practices, and work together to overcome these challenges. We're excited to hear from the esteemed speakers in this session who will share their insights and experiences. Their expertise will undoubtedly inspire and equip us with the knowledge needed to advance these critical initiatives. Thank you all for your dedication to building resilient communities and for your participation in this important discussion. Together, we can continue to innovate and implement solutions that protect our environment and enhance the quality of life for future generations. And without further ado, I'm going to hand this session over to our moderator, Dr. Sofía Pérez-Guzmán, to get us started.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. So, as part of the conference theme, Cultivating Climate Resilience Communities, this session is going to explore how living shorelines, nature-based solutions, and nearshore coastal armoring can strengthen resilience while balancing ecological, regulatory, and engineering considerations. Oh, hold on, there you go. And my name is Sofía Pérez-Guzmán. I am an assistant professor in civil and environmental engineering at the Georgia Institute of Technology. My research focuses on freight transportation solutions in humanitarian contexts, and in particular, I'm interested in how sustainable and community-driven solutions can enhance community preparedness and long-term resilience. And I need to do a shameless plug here. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about my research, please stop by my poster later, or just come talk to me at any point. In the poster, I'm going to talk about a project related to building a path towards community-owned resilience hubs for equitable climate adaptation and mitigation in the Southeast. And I'm honored to moderate today's discussion. We are fortunate to have two wonderful experts with us today. We have Hollie Schmidt, principal and the Global Solutions Director of Sustainability, Resilience, and Climate Response for the Americas region at Jacobs. With 28 years of experience, she has led large-scale projects focused on sustainability, resilience, and climate response for public, private, and federal clients. And her expertise spans strategic planning, feasibility studies, and implementing resilient solutions for communities facing climate stressors. We also have with us Georgia Busch, coastal specialist with the North Carolina Coastal Federation, where she works on coastal restoration, advocacy, and outreach to support healthy coastal habitats and communities. And with a background in environmental education and master's in coastal and ocean policy, she brings a unique perspective on how nature-based solutions, such as living shorelines, can serve as effective climate adaptation strategies. And before we begin, I wanted to encourage all of you to actively participate in today's discussion. We're going to make this as interactive as we can. We will have 2 engaging presentations. Each of them is going to have Q&A dedicated time, and then at the end we'll have an interactive discussion. So the goal for the session is to encourage you, or not the goal for the session, I just said I wanted to make it very, very participative. I want to encourage you to think about something as we go through the session. How can we better communicate the value of nature-based solutions to stakeholders, policymakers, and the communities? Question number 1 for you to think about. Question number 2, how can we improve multi-sector partnerships to accelerate the implementation of these nature-based solutions? So with that, I want to open the floor for our first speaker. And Hollie, Schmidt, please, we're all yours. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. It's always tricky going right after lunch, so if I see some heads nodding, I'm just going to talk louder in the microphone. Thank you for the introduction. Just a little more about myself. I am a Global Solutions Director of Sustainability, Resilience, and Climate Response at Jacobs. So I work across all of our markets, all of our geographies, and I have the pleasure of working with many, many diverse professionals, which I think is really reflective of the room that we have today. And I find that we get the best solutions when we have a multidisciplinary team and all kinds of varied perspectives from different areas of expertise. I have led the rebuild strategy at Tyndall Air Force Base after Hurricane Michael in the pre-design space. So if anybody's familiar with that, it was a Category 5 hurricane. I'll be talking about nature-based solutions as it relates to Tyndall and some of the work that we're doing with the Department of Defense. I am the project executive for our Engineering with Nature program, which is a Corps of Engineers initiative that comes out of their ERDIC department. And I really am responsible for driving resilience and sustainability into the business at Jacobs. I also lead a department of 65 planning federal directors. So I want to talk about the difference between sustainability and resilience, because a lot of times people use those as synonyms. And they're synergistic to each other, but they're not synonymous. And I like to say that sustainability is about what we do to our planet, the impact that we have when we develop. And nature-based solutions is a wonderful way to lessen that impact on air quality, water quality, reducing heat islanding effect, how we can vegetate as we develop so that we have a lesser negative footprint as we develop as a society. Resilience is about what the planet throws back at us, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's a flood, whether it's winds, whether it's climate change related, and how can we be strong against those shocks and stressors. So one of those is inbound, being strong and resilient against these disasters and events that occur, and one is about being gentle on our planet and trying to get to a net zero or net positive state. And those two things can work together. So if you think about water, for instance, when you start to introduce water recycling and reuse, that's driving your water consumption down to a net zero or a net positive state for water, but it's also building resilience in your water system because now you're just not completely dependent on the grid. So those are the types of lessons that we try and build when we sell work to our clients and demonstrate the value of resilience and sustainability together. So talking about our Engineering with Nature program, what is Engineering with Nature? It's the intentional alignment of natural and engineering processes to efficiently and sustainably deliver economic, environmental, and social benefits through collaboration. And I know there's been a lot of talk about collaboration. That is key and critical. So as I mentioned, this is a Corps of Engineers program out of their ERDIC department. Jacobs has been working with ERDIC and Engineering with Nature since we began Tyndall in 2019. I also brought some of the atlases from Engineering with Nature that are right here on the table with Heather. So if anybody wants a hard copy of a book, which seems so old school, but you know, if you want to pack this in your suitcase and take it with you, it's a great read. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of the terminology that we use for nature-based solutions and Engineering with Nature. So you can talk about natural and green infrastructure, nature-based and nature-based solutions, green and gray infrastructure. And a lot of times in nature-based solutions, there is an engineered and gray component to really give that the resilience outcome that we're looking for. And then the components of that are a nature-positive design. So how can we put more nature back into a development or an area that existed before? How do we use nature for climate response and hazard mitigation? It's an amazing treatment for coastal resilience and flood mitigation, and that's mainly what we're using it for in the examples that I'll discuss. Biomimicry and biodiversity. So how can we replicate what nature does? And I like to say that Mother Nature bats last, right? We can't control Mother Nature, but what we can do is work with Mother Nature, and that's really the intent here. It's great for carbon sequestration, so it's a carbon sink, and then it really has a great resilience and sustainability outcome. So talking about the nature-based solutions that we did at Tyndall Air Force Base, which is on the panhandle of Florida, we really had an intention of delivering an installation of the future. It was extremely innovative. And so what we looked at in terms of the application at Tyndall was really responding to this Category 5 hurricane that hit. The eye of the hurricane went directly over the flight line of the Air Force Base. So this is the most mission critical part of the installation. It tumbled jets, it tore up hangars. I mean, it was massive devastation to the entire area. There was a 14-foot storm surge across the Air Force Base and Mexico Beach to, you know, the side of the hurricane that was pushing the surge. It got a 22-foot surge. It literally wiped Mexico Beach off the map. 155 mile per hour sustained winds. So it was massive. 100% asset damage. So we didn't demolish 100% of the assets, but 100% damage. So when the colonel at the Air Force Base said, Hollie, in order to get bipartisan congressional approval to get the funds to rebuild the Air Force Base, we have to build it back more sustainably, more resiliently, and use smart technology. So how are you going to do that? And I thought, well, gosh, how much time do I have? He said, I'll give you 2 weeks to figure it out. So no pressure there, right? But what we started with were performance standards. And the performance standards talk about how the systems need to perform in a certain event. And so we developed what that event is, what type of storm, what type of flooding, how big are the surges, what type of wind speeds are we looking at. And so the Secretary of the Air Force issued 2 memos, the Design Wind Speed and Building Envelope Protection Memo, which set the designed wind speeds depending upon the mission criticality of the buildings, and everything had to adhere to that. Whether it was the types of plants we were planting, the anchoring for light posts and signage, the type of roofing systems that we use, the framing around doors and windows, it rippled through everything. And then the design flood elevation. So we all know, right, there are 2 ways to become more resilient. You either adapt in place or you retreat. And in this case, they had the real estate to retreat. And so no new buildings were going to be built under the 19-foot elevation on the Gulf side or 14-foot elevation on the bay side. And so we baked nature-based solutions, performance standards into the directives, which were then put into all the requirements documents for the rebuild. And we did performance standards, design standards, technical guidelines, all which drove what is now a $6.4 billion rebuild of a military city. And so with that, we did a landscape master plan. And the key to nature-based solutions is myth busting. So if we can talk the Department of Defense into using nature-based solutions, I feel like we can talk anybody into using nature-based solutions because they're a tough crowd, right? And one of those is that military construction won't pay for nature-based solutions. Well, if it's your stormwater management strategy and your coastal resilience armament, they will. Landscaping is nice to have, right? It doesn't provide any valuable function. Well, if you explain how nature really can treat stormwater and can act as a flood barrier, it starts to change people's minds. The base will not maintain it. We're just going to mow it down. You might hear that in terms of living shorelines and other nature-based solutions. So we wrote maintenance specifications specific to our nature-based solutions that they could hand over to their maintenance contractors. It costs more. It doesn't. It doesn't cost more. And you do have to pay to maintain it over time, but eventually the intent is that it almost becomes self-sustaining. This was one of my favorites. Landscape areas attract snakes, bears, and mosquitoes. And this is in the Panhandle of Florida. They were already there, right? There were snakes in the buildings, there were bear droppings by the doors. I mean, they were already there. So maybe if you put some of their natural habitat back, they might, stay out of our habitat. We worked with security in terms of sight lines, the height to make sure all the view sheds were preserved and the security anti-terrorism force protection measures were adhered to. And we also made sure that we didn't put them in areas where they might develop in the future. So what we did is we had to understand the entire landform. So what you see here is a cross-section of the bay side, which is the top picture. So from the Gulf side, the barrier islands as they go up into Tyndall Air Force Base, and then the bay side where you've got the flight line that goes into the Back Bay area. So understanding that landform, the native landscapes and habitats that would be there had we not disturbed them, and making sure that we had very specific design solutions, nature-based solutions was one of them, for those very specific landform areas. What you see on the top is the Air Force Base as it was maintained before the storm. The takeaway here is that light green area was all mowed grass, right? Or really just kind of mowed weeds. Air Force likes it trimmed and neat and manicured. And what we were able to do is on the bottom, integrate what those natural habitats were that were more managed areas outside of the developed areas with native landscaping. And what that did was we took everything under that 19-foot elevation where nothing new was going to be built, transitioned that back into wetlands, because that's a very important area when you've got stormwater that's trying to drain downhill and you've got a surge coming uphill. At some point in time, those two water bodies are going to collide. And so we really wanted to put back that natural wetland habitat in those water collision areas. We also took the drainage areas that had, kind of concrete, paved, expedited stormwater, and we naturalized those areas. And so with that, we really cut down on their mow, which was 90% of their grounds maintenance budget. And with a reduction on that mow budget, we're able to then invest back in revegetating areas. So that was significant. So what you can see on the top right-hand side was that current state of some of those drainage areas. And on the bottom two pictures are what we were proposing to naturalize those areas. And really, Florida gets a ton of rain, right? I mean, we are getting rain bombs. We get so much rain at a time. And so by slowing that conveyance of stormwater, using nature as part of the stormwater management system, and showing them how it would perform in periods of high rain, not to mention the fact that we made it an amenity and put walking paths near it, and it really became a health and wellness benefit as well. This is also a graphic that we did to show all of the multiple benefits of re-establishing native habitat areas. This is a longleaf pine that's native to that part of Florida. And so what we did with the stormwater management is what I call the pancake versus muffin application. We created a stormwater treatment train of basins of these shallow areas that were wide, but they still had the same carrying capacity and holding capacity as what you see as those typical stormwater ponds that normally have a 3-to-1 slope, some sort of little aeration device in the middle and a fence around it, right? This looks much nicer. But I also found that convincing people to use nature-based solutions, it was critical to have good visuals. And so I'm very fortunate to have an amazing visual media team that really said, look, here's how beautiful this is going to look, and if we combine it with pedestrian mobility and physical, their PT requirements and things like that, added shade, it's really hot in Florida. they were convincing. And our visual media team submitted these for some awards, and they got awards for the graphical communication of our graphics. And then here's showing it in a time of heavy rain, and you can see the water starting to pool, right? Because we've got our pancake stormwater basin, but it's not going to stay full all the time. So talking about the stormwater treatment train, in the Southeast, it's very common that we treat stormwater with curb and gutter, inlets, concrete pipes, expedited conveyance, usually to an area that's going to flood when a surge comes in or when you have really heavy rains, because many times those systems just weren't built for the volume of stormwater that we're getting right now. So we turned that on its head at Tyndall. We did not use any curb and gutter. We used all bioswales. We did bioswales in parking lots. And again, you can kind of see that stormwater treatment train. The important thing here is sustainability is taking those stormwater basins and treating them all along the way, feeding into each other so that you have a really high water quality that you're discharging into your barrier islands and into the Gulf side of the base. That's sustainability. How can we treat our water better so the quality is there? On the flip side, we did a coastal resilience strategy of rebuilding those barrier islands, which had 15-foot dunes before the hurricane, and those went down in some cases to 0, 2, 3, 4 feet, so that the dunes really got destroyed, but they did their job, right? The base would have flooded more if that dune system wasn't there. That's resilience. That's the first line of defense. And then restoring those wetlands areas really helps with that water energy and tamping that energy down in a flood event. We also used low impact development standards and philosophies around the buildings so that we tried to create a sponge city so that as the rainfall fell, we were capturing those in landscaped areas. All of our landscaping was native, no invasives. We created plant palettes of both plants that were approved to use and plants that were exclusively prohibited to view. And I'll go a little bit faster here. I think I'm at 15 minutes. So the areas that we were uphill of the 19 feet and the 14 feet are on that top left graphic are what's not in color. So it really excluded a lot of areas that we could actually develop in. We created stormwater coastal resilience zones based on our stormwater basins. There were pilot projects as part of the coastal resilience plan. We created a whole stakeholder group. You know, Dwayne talked about the power of collaboration and stakeholders. We had 30 different stakeholders. We've attracted $20 million to build the pilots so that we can test them and scale them up. And we created typologies for all the coastal areas based on those landforms and how we wanted to rebuild the dunes. So just very quickly, I'll go through this. We took then the Engineering with Nature program to the Department of the Navy. We focused on 3 different geographies. We visited 11 different installations where we did charrettes and brainstorming on how we could use nature-based solutions for mission assurance. How do we protect the mission through nature? Over 30 different projects. So looking at the Southeastern, our top line shocks and stressors that we ran into across the entire Southeast, sea level rise, flooding from storm surge, and urban stormwater runoff. You know, you hear of sunny day flooding that's happening now, and erosion and sedimentation. So we went in and did these 1-week charrettes. We came out with, I work with some talented landscape architects. I'm also a landscape architect. And so really looking at what is that holistic solution for resilience, and what are those projects, and then doing some visuals. This was one thin layer placement at MCAS Beaufort. So there's a new standard with the Corps of Engineers to do 70% beneficial dredge reuse when they're dredging. And that is really a wonderful way to do nature-based solutions and to help with flood mitigation. This is one we did at MacDill Air Force Base. They're going under extreme erosion. And so they're about to dredge Tampa Bay. So we're working with USACE on how can we use that dredge material to rebuild wetlands and marshlands and barrier islands. And then this is over at MacDill, kind of showing where that dredge material would be applied. Okay, so that was a lot really quickly, but I do think I've got just a few minutes here that we can take some Q&A if anybody has a question. Yes, ma'am.
So at Tyndall, did you develop a plan to kind of monitor the long-term efficacy of the various activities that were proposed?
For the Coastal Resilience Implementation Plan, yes. We did not create a monitoring program for the nature-based solutions on the installation. I was kind of part of that pre-design process, but I'm sure we could probably encourage them to do that. We did tons of analyses around the benefits of nature-based solutions. So, for instance, we did an analysis around why plant street trees. Because it's not only helping with stormwater management, it's providing shade and helping with the heat islanding effect. And we worked with our engineers to demonstrate that we could lower the temperature of the pavement, which would then extend the life of the road. And we were showing maintenance savings because they wouldn't have to repave as often. So coastal resilience, yes, but not on the installation.
So as you were developing the project at Tyndall, you said you did a number of analyses. Were you able to quantify the benefits versus the cost in a way that kind of was more in line with the traditional BCA that a lot of folks probably in this room are familiar with?
We did an overall programmatic cost-benefit analysis over the life cycle of the rebuild. So that did include the nature-based solutions, but it didn't isolate it out of there. But the payback period and the ROI was very compelling. It had an 11-year payback period. I think it was about $90 million more to do the more sustainable and resilient applications that we were proposing. And again, it had that 11-year payback period. And the savings on O&M and the non-financial benefits, health, wellness, habitat restoration, water quality, air quality, we quantified all of that as well. It's just hard to put a numeric dollar value on that. I will say, if there's a website, tyndallifs.com. If you go there, there are tons of design guidelines, tons of guidance that I think are very applicable around the whole Gulf Coast. And we're actually working with the Corps of Engineers right now to write standards for the Corps for nature-based solutions. So the Corps is moving on that, which is a very positive thing. We've got a question
Me?
here.
I got the mic. Hi, Dave Jones with Storm Center Communications. Thanks for the presentation. I was just wondering, two questions. Number one, and you sort of answered it, is this design being used as a model for other DoD installations? Because there are so many other installations that are under threats from climate change and extreme weather. And the second question is, how has this design, has it changed their behavior at all at Tyndall when the next Category 3, 4, or 5 hurricane comes?
On your first question, and can you repeat it? That was about, are other DoD installations doing this?
Are they using this as a model?
They are,
too?
yes. I speak at many DoD events about Tyndall because everyone's talking about how do we get an installation of the future when we don't have $6.4 billion to do it with. And so what I talk about is, again, is that pre-design phase, getting an accurate vulnerability assessment that is local, climate, culture, and context. And it's predictive in nature, right? So not just looking at what has happened in the past, but what is going to happen. And we have really good scientists and engineers that can predict all of that. And get your performance standards, get your design guidelines, get everything in place before you create a budget. And that's key because lots of installations have a budget and then you try and make it more resilient and they don't match because it costs more, right? Initially, it costs more. In the long run, it costs less, and you have risk avoidance, and you avoid mission disruption. So it's all in that pre-design phase, and I really think that's key for any of it, right? It's hard to build resilience in once an RFP goes out, once you have contractors bidding on the work. You have to get in that pre-design space so that the budgets are based on more resilient build. But yes, I lead the federal planning group. We work a ton with DoD. It's baby steps in other locations, but if we can get the right audience and convince them, when we hold Tyndall up a lot to say, see, it can happen. We just had to exceed all of basically the federal building codes. We exceeded all of it. So That's the same with any kind of building code. You have to build the code to the performance standards to get the results that you want. What was the second question again?
What happens when the next category 3, 4, or 5
So it's going to withstand it.
Does it change their behavior?
I don't know if it's changed their behavior. I think it's changed the Department of Defense's behavior because we were able to achieve it at Tyndall. And so there's a report out from the DoD where it identifies around 80 installations across the services where climate change is the #1 threat to national security. And so we're working a lot with the DoD on how do you become more resilient. So I think that Tyndall, they're very, very proud of the rebuild and what we were able to achieve and get done, and it's under construction right now, right? So it was sort of like we ran to get everything in place before the design started, and now they're being built. I will say that we have to defend the nature-based solutions with swords and knives, and because people want to cut that out. That's the first thing. If value engineering comes, they're like, we don't need trees, and so it's been a slog with the design build contractors to defend these solutions, but luckily we've got some people in place that are good at boxing.
Hey, thank you for your presentation. I think I've actually seen you talk about Tyndall at a couple other conferences, and it's always exciting to see what's happening. I'm curious if there's been any of this seeping out into the communities surrounding Tyndall. So University of Georgia has a really big partnership with Engineering with Nature, a lot of work going on around Fort Stewart on the coast with the Defense Community Resilience Program. And as they're starting their resilience study, thinking about these communities surrounding military installations, are those communities able to adopt the same design standards and metrics that Tyndall has put in place in Florida? I'm looking at it as someone, my county touches a military installation. How then can we get our hands on those and start implementing them and having this kind of regional lexicon surrounding performance metrics and standards?
Sure. So that's why we created the website. It's a .com website. It's not a protected DoD website. And I let people know the Air Force paid us millions of dollars to figure this out. And there's lots of guidance there that can be reused and adapted and tweaked to your local context. And so part of the Coastal Resilience Implementation Plan at Tyndall, lots of stakeholders. It's a whole regional initiative. In fact, a little brag, the Tyndall Coastal Resilience Implementation Plan won a Biden-Harris Presidential Sustainability Award. So we were very, very proud of that. So it's being really recognized and touted. But there's also, and Dwayne talked about this, there's a program called Military Installation Resilience Review, or a MIR. That's a grant from OLDCC that's awarded to the communities that host military installations. And so that does a holistic vulnerability assessment that is way broader than just climate, and what are the shocks and stressors outside the federal fence line that the community can fix to make sure that the installation is resilient, because if you have a thriving installation, you have a thriving community. If you have an installation that's dying and those jobs are going away and many times there are economic engines in there, the community suffers for that. And so I encourage anyone here, if you're interested in hearing more about MERS, I could do a whole session on those. I can give you insight to that if your community hosts military installations, but we're doing a ton of them, and it's a great program. I just hope that the spigot got turned off last week, so I'm hoping it gets turned back on soon. Okay, I think we need to transition, so if everyone can hold any additional questions to the end, we'll get to our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now welcome, there you go, Georgia Busch, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Georgia Busch. My title is Coastal Specialist. It's kind of not a great name because I'm really more of a generalist. I do a lot of work surrounding coastal management and shoreline work with the North Carolina Coastal Federation. But I'm here to talk to you about our nature-based solutions programs and what we do to adapt in the face of climate change, working in the resiliency space, and then of course fortifying and making our North Carolina estuary systems as wonderful as they can be. I'm going to back up Hollie on almost every sentiment and echo the importance of engineering with nature and nature-based solutions. The only thing I disagree with is that after lunch presentation is great because I kind of feel like anything can happen, so we'll just go from here. I will go fast because I recognize there were other questions. There's lots of value in that, so I'm here to show and tell and give you a little bit of a local context for all of these wonderful practices we've been talking about. Very quickly, here's kind of my outline. Again, we do a lot at the Coastal Federation, so I'm happy to answer lots of questions, but I'm going to zero in a little bit closer on living shorelines as our main nature-based solution method. Okay, so a little bit about the Coastal Federation. We were founded in 1982. Up until last year, our founder was our same executive director for 41 years. But we're growing as an organization. We are based in 3 different offices around the coast, and we're active in all 20 coastal counties. My office is approximately 10 miles that way. Go until you hit water. And I welcome you all to Wilmington because it's a great town. But there's a lot of other richness in the rest of the North Carolina coast that I encourage you to visit too. So our programs, we kind of look at the coast holistically, but of course there are some subject areas that get more of our attention. With salt marsh, that is where I'm going to dive into our Living Shoreline program. It lives under kind of our greater salt marsh planning and restoration. But then of course we focus on oysters, their populations, oyster aquaculture industry, water quality. We address a lot of estuarine water quality issues through stormwater retrofits or pre-planning, putting input into what's going to happen to development on the coast. And then of course marine debris, that has a lot to do with cleanup and prevention. So there's a lot of education rolled up in that as well. Very shameless plug for one of my oyster shell recycling collection sites that I manage all across our southeast region here. In the southeast region, across our three coastal counties down here, we recycled over 5,500 bushels of oyster shell last year. So that's my big accomplishment I've been celebrating here at the beginning of this year. Sticking with the theme of collaboration and no one entity does any of this kind of work alone, we are very driven by the initiatives through the South Atlantic Salt Marsh Initiative, greater grouping of all of these organizations that are coming together under the goal to enhance salt marsh habitats around our coast, either as a resiliency measure or just as straight up habitat restoration. But we get a lot of goals trickled down through that initiative, and we get to complement a lot of the other work going around some of our other South Atlantic states. So of course, what drives the Coastal Federation or even the South Atlantic Salt Marsh Initiative to do this work? Of course, it's going to be our coastal issues. So in the overarching topics of climate change, flooding, pollution, they manifest in these forms of shoreline erosion, stormwater runoff, and marine debris. Those are the kind of sub-issues that we tackle. And of course, shoreline erosion is the big one that is concerning a lot of folks all across the coast. One, because it threatens your home property, it might threaten public property, might threaten Department of Defense installations, you name it, anything that's here on the coast can be threatened by shoreline erosion. So here's some good examples of a decent escarpment or kind of a drop off in the edge of that marsh toe. So those are some words I might use through the rest of the presentation. What do we do to curb shoreline erosion? Traditionally, it's been hard structures like bulkheads and seawalls, riprap sometimes used. Anybody know a problem with these things? Shout it out. What's the problem with bulkheads? Accelerate erosion, exactly. Unfortunately, oh, there we go. Unfortunately, as nice and strong and structured as this bulkhead looks, unfortunately, it will not last too long. Next biggest category 3, 4, 5 storm comes through, we have incredible surge. The water wave energy is constantly hitting that flat wall and eventually will kind of curb out the rest of the existing sand and sediment that's there along the bottom of the bulkhead. and bam, we have a failure, which is not great. Who's an engineer in the room that likes the word failure? Nobody, right? And of course, this is obviously an issue for this property owner, but that's a pretty big investment that just failed right in front of our eyes. So we're not looking to lean towards bulkheads anymore for this particular purpose, but also because they are less desirable than maybe creating some habitat. So looking into co-benefits of armoring your shoreline and protecting your existing marsh, we could bring in some natural materials and create some habitat while we are armoring the shoreline. So this is work published by Dr. Rachel Gitman and her co-authors about the study directly after Hurricane Irene, where this homeowner was probably not happy, but glad enough to be a part of the study where we could compare before and afters of a hardened shoreline versus a natural nature-based solution armored shoreline there. We'll get more into that. Okay, so because these bulkheads fail, because they are expensive, because there is basically no other co-benefit to putting a wall on your shoreline property, we have to zero in a little bit further in coastal resiliency. Resiliency, again, we had that definition of what the earth brings to us and how we respond. We need to turn away from those hard walls and think about what nature gives us here. So of course that brings us to living shorelines and all of the education, again, we do beyond that as well. So what are living shorelines? I like to offer a little bit of vocab here because these are some of the marsh and restoration terms I'll use. But essentially a living shoreline is a nature-based structure or a sill offshore like this that will encourage marsh growth, will encourage oyster populations to grow, and of course then building up kind of a cohesive habitat that'll attract all kinds of other wildlife, as well as offering all of the buffer and systems-based ecological services of any other kind of marsh habitat. So as you can see, we have the sill structure that can be made out of lots of different materials. I'll show you that here in a second. It can be made different shapes. It can contour the line of the shore. It can jut out a little bit more, depending on what the restoration goals are and what upland infrastructure or habitats we're protecting. We can design lots of different shapes and structures here. But of course, this sill will act as a speed bump. Once the water comes from, wherever, boat wake or storm, regular surge, whatever it might be, it slows down like a speed bump on the sill. And as the water kind of gently settles in this area, obviously the sediment will drop out. This says fill, as if we were going to bring fill on site. We don't really do that anymore. But that elevation growth will allow more marsh plants to grow. And of course, we have acreage kind of accumulating and marsh habitat growing. So that is the general gist of the structure of a living shoreline and kind of the process we expect when we introduce those nature-based materials into the environment in that particular way. All right, so some of my friends in the room are actually credited on this slide as well, but had to give you just a big overview of some of the ecosystem services offered by Living Shorelines, including what they do for protecting habitats, for armoring shorelines, but for enhancing even more marsh area for all of these other amazing marsh ecosystem benefits. All right, so what can living shorelines be made out of? This one right here is supposed to say bagged oyster shell. So you can see our volunteers there kind of working together to move some of those bagged oyster shells into that sill structure. So then again, we can follow that process and hopefully get some marsh growth. A little bit larger format, we have granite. Living shorelines can be made out of granite. Some of you folks might see this and call it riprap, depending on the actual design and style and where the granite is placed. Doesn't always have to necessarily be called riprap, but granite is a great material for us to use, especially in high wave energy areas or an area where the shoreline might see a lot of fetch or a lot of wind that's driving across the surface of the water. And then, of course, we can also use marine-grade concrete. That's a material we use in lots of restoration designs along with living shorelines here. So I think this is a great example of seeing how the sill itself probably didn't follow the exact contour of the marsh. It gave itself a little bit bigger of a toe in space for all of this new growth to happen here. So bagged oyster shells, granite and concrete are some of the most common materials we use. Now they can come in a couple different shapes as well. This one right here is a marsh toe revetment, meaning the material is placed right up against the toe of the marsh. That is not a structure that is offshore a little bit, but instead is really trying to reinforce the existing marsh that's there. We also have a vertical wall, which is not as popular of a style, but it's certainly used in plenty of places where we have lots of boat wake or maybe even more narrow canals where that boat wake would be even more extreme regardless of how intense it is. And then, of course, even just a marsh grass planting on its own can be considered, resilience action underneath that living shoreline model, because some sills need multiple times of planting, going through cycles. Maybe sometimes plants go in the ground and they don't do well. The following year, we need to replant. But that's a huge part of the overall living shoreline system when we install them. And of course, we love living shorelines because it gives a chance for the community to get hands-on. We have living shorelines that are built on that kind of community scale, so lots and lots of volunteers can get involved, and it's so easy, a baby can do it. So, of course, apologies for that little block in the way, but you get the gist of the photo here. And of course we can scale up. We have living shorelines that are of that size where volunteers can get involved with their hands, but of course more where we need to pull out the big fun machines and work with lots of crews and lots of people. It'll take lots of time. But here you can even see some living shorelines going in around this area of a newer bulkhead because they wanted to combine habitat with that hard armored shoreline there. They will not gain any marsh in this scenario, but maybe there'll be some oyster growth and again another natural barrier before before that wave action is degrading that bulkhead over time. So from a handful of volunteer-based projects to hundreds of projects coastwide, this map here isn't even an exhaustive list of all of the projects that were installed even in the last 3 years, but we are building living shorelines all across the North Carolina coast. And for us, that's a great benefit, again, for the estuarine ecosystem, but that means just less and less bulkheads are being built as well, which is a great thing for our overall coast. So now I just want to go through a quick show and tell, just so you have an idea of where these projects are built, to what scale, and the examples that I have here show the different living shorelines throughout different process of installation. So that'll be kind of interesting to see some of that over time. So here we have an example from the Trinity Center at Pine Knoll Shores. I believe this has been installed but not planted yet. So you can see there's lots of good space there for more marsh grasses to be introduced. We have Ward Shore Park in Swansboro, and this one, I believe, this actually was not necessarily planted afterwards. There was just really good marsh grass that came in and kind of colonized the area after we installed this nice big granite riprap. An interesting, I kind of wish I had a different perspective of this photo, but an interesting way to look at the design here is that we have these nice big sills here. There's a break, and then you see there's some more sill material offshore. That kind of baffling off like that, it allows for more water movement through the system, allows for fish and smaller estuarine species to not get stuck behind that nice granite. So whenever you see a living shoreline or any sill like that there's a gap, it's for those purposes. We have, this is private property up in the town of Atlantic and called White Point, but you can see, I love this. I love when we get pictures of when our marsh grasses were clearly, literally just planted. They haven't gotten big and beefy yet, but that's the approximate density of the plants. I think it shows a good perspective on how many plants we put in the ground after we build a structure like this. Public projects, we're also building at state parks. There's plenty of reason for resilience to come into play for state park management. And this is up at Hammocks Beach State Park in Swansboro. And currently I'm working, I just 2 months ago was awarded the permit for about 1,200 linear feet of living shoreline to be installed at Carolina Beach State Park as well. So that's just another big and upcoming project. This is a wonderful project, again, up in the Swansboro area called Jones Island. It's just a stunning example of that oyster colonization on that sill right there. This was a really, really, really long-standing project. I think there were a lot of community partners involved, and over the course of maybe a decade, they were phasing series of sills and marsh grass plantings. So this one has been kind of like babysat for a while, and it's really, really flourishing because of that. Okay, the North Carolina Aquarium up in Pine Knoll Shores. Again, another really good example. I think we saw this photo before, a good example of how we can manipulate that contour and try to build out more marsh as much as we can. And we're getting to the DoD portion of the projects. I wanted to, again, kind of piggyback off of Hollie in the discussion of what DoD installations are doing, what their priorities might be. We come into play, North Carolina Coastal Federation comes into play as a good community partner for Department of Defense under the REPI program. That, if everybody's familiar with that, the Resilience and Environmental Protection Initiative, I believe that's an acronym there. But they're, at least in North Carolina, Marine Corps Air Station New River and across the river, Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune, they are concerned about the development kind of encroaching and getting too close to the installations as well. So it is land-based development as well as environmental concerns and threats from climate change. So they actually have, again, well, at least the way we've been involved, have a little bit more holistic approach on what development and what other threats are kind of coming inward to those installations. So we are a great community partner for them because we obviously have the restoration expertise and can get funding through other kinds of avenues and come contribute to those good resilience projects at Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point and the other two that I mentioned before. And this is probably one of my favorite and also most recent of the photos that I've showed you. This is up at Jockey's Ridge State Park in Nags Head. Even if you're from North Carolina or not from North Carolina, this is a pretty iconic place. But there's a beautiful sill offshore, and then of course again another photo kind of giving you an idea of density of plants that we worry about afterwards. Okay, so just a couple more show and tells here, and again, the co-benefits of living shorelines is the big selling point, the big factor we use to explain to folks why they are better alternative than bulkheads. And while I'm talking about that, I want to highlight a couple of the private companies and contractors that we work with who have developed innovative new technologies for constructing living shorelines. So depending on the wave energy, the space you have, even just where you're located in the state, these could be good options as well. So from Native Shorelines, we have a product called Quick Reef. This is a cast concrete into these units here that actually have a veneer of oyster shell on top. So we found a way to utilize that oyster shell and that substrate material, substrate texture for oysters to come and colonize on without having to use as many shells to fill up this whole gap here. So with Native Shorelines, the entire system is called the Quick Reef Defender, but their units are called shoreline habitat units, which I think is really cool. They are active all over the place, very much here in North Carolina as well as up in Virginia. So keep an eye out for Native Shorelines and Quick Reef. Another big company that we love to plug and we'll use for a lot of our large-scale projects is Natrix. And here you can see the sill. This is a really beautiful picture, but up close, it's habitat. You know, it's not. This is not a shape that you can really even describe and recognize. I love that it looks like bald cypress knees. Clearly there's a lot happening here with the vegetation and again, hopeful oysters that will come and colonize that area. But the Natrix exoforms, that's what these units are called, they're customizable. They can be different shapes, forms, slopes. They 3D print them, so it's just very, very cool. And again, this couldn't look more like swampy and estuarine, and an alligator should be nearby, so I just love that photo. And a third lovely company based here in North Carolina that we love to showcase is Sandbar Oyster Company. They have a beautiful system here called Oyster Catcher, and they actually take jute fibers and will dip them in marine grade concrete and kind of mold them into shape. These are what we call tables, and they kind of interlocked together like little connector sets almost. But this is another great product, not really what we would use suitable for high wave energy areas, but in this nice little kind of protected area of Soundside Park in Surf City, this was kind of the perfect platform for tons and tons of oysters to come and grow. So I love this photo because it kind of gives you that through look of the tables and the legs, but you probably couldn't fit another oyster on that if you wanted to. So it's a great success story. Another plug for our South Atlantic Salt Marsh Initiative. Again, collaboration being the theme. How are we coming together in the community? And visit marshforward.org if you want to learn a little bit more about that and some of the other organizations that we work with. Just a quick slide on the future of Living Shorelines, whereas we are kind of providing the platform for a lot of research to happen. We're doing monitoring, but we're not kind of diving so heavy into the analytics and quantitative data with Living Shorelines as a benefit, as having more benefits over a bulkhead. But these are some of the entities that are working on that and who we are collaborating with to reach some of those research goals. Thank you everybody so much. I'm gonna take my seat over here so we can do some panel style questions, but let me know if you have any questions about Living Shorelines.
Thank you very much, Georgia. We do have time for a couple of questions. If you want to direct those for Georgia or for both of our panelists for a more general discussion, we can welcome any questions. Yes.
Hi, thank you. Great presentations, both of you. On the Living Shorelines, we know that storms are going to come back, right? They're going to come back. Do you think that the community and everybody is going to want to replace the Living Shorelines if storms wipe them out? Do you think they're going to come back and say, look, it didn't work? Or are you prepared to say, look how much damage it minimized? Because it was there. Thanks.
So for a number of the Living Shorelines that are already installed and in place, I think when the next storm comes, unfortunately, it's going to be when that happens, is when we can, make those assessments. It's just storm by storm. I think the benefit, in other words, just getting to your question, there's not as many guarantees as we can make about a living shoreline as this will save your property from hurricane ... But it clearly is better than a bulkhead in so many other ways that is guaranteed to eventually fail, and it's riding on the co-benefits of creating habitat, of creating a more resilient marsh space in front of your property. Unfortunately, I've visited property owners before who were interested in living shorelines or clearly thought there was an issue, or over time they could notice less marsh grasses or whatever it may be, whatever their observations are. Believe it or not, I've gone to visit some people who said, oh, well, we've been taking out the oysters like little by little so that my grandkids can play on the sand there in the marsh. So I am less worried about trying to convince people of the guarantee of a living shoreline and more so worried about this is what your marsh is supposed to look like. There's a lot of folks who just the perception off the bat of what kind of habitat they're in is a total, totally incorrect thing. So the research is being done. All of that analysis is coming through. Again, the more storms we have, the more structures that are in place, we can continue to kind of test that. But as far as I know, with the living shorelines that the North Carolina Coastal Federation has had anything to do with for property owners or in public spaces, there's not been any complaints.
Thank you. Time for another question?
Hi, I'm Amanda. I'm from North Carolina again. And while I'm pretty familiar with the policy context in North Carolina, some other folks might not be, and I'm curious also about the other states that Jacobs is working in. Can you talk about the public policy that surrounds nature-based solutions and the kinds of issues or the kinds of policies that make it hard to install nature-based solutions, the kinds of policies that support them?
The mic takes a second to turn on. So at least for the effort from the North Carolina Coastal Federation, we are looking towards pushing for a programmatic review of the permitting process for nature-based solutions. Unfortunately, that takes several years, and it's not that there are currently any barriers to, say, if you're a homeowner or me or any restoration practitioner looking to conduct that kind of work, it could be easier. And that being that not everybody has survey skills. You know, this is very much a practice that homeowners could do on their own, and we can a homeowner DIY, you know, go and do this project and take this resiliency step for your property. But the permitting is not friendly for, you know, any resident out there to try and get that done. So I don't necessarily know that right now the goal is to make it harder to permit a bulkhead, but we want it to be as easy to permit a living shoreline as it is a bulkhead. And again, another kind of unfortunate anecdote is that I do often hear from the Division of Coastal Management folks that they are permitting bulkheads left and right all the time, and they get especially excited when they get to talk about a living shoreline potential project because it's something new. It, again, brings that other level of co-benefits for the ecosystem services that it provides. So when people know about it, it's not generally a hard sell, but getting through those regulatory barriers is. So like I said, Coastal Federation is going to be working on supporting a programmatic review of that permitting process just to make it that much easier and to make it more accessible.
And I would echo the permitting. It's a big deal. And so when you're trying to do nature-based solutions, getting with the permitting agencies as soon as possible, getting them on board, like when we were over at Beaufort, we had those agencies in the room from the very, very start of the workshop so that they're walking along with you. They know it's coming. And in many cases, they've never permitted anything like this. So it's a matter of, it's new, even though it's nature. And I think in terms of general policy, it's not so much that there's policies in place that encourage nature-based solutions. It's the policies in place that allow us to clear nature to the waterline. And really, that zone, right, that floodable zone that is naturalized is so critical. And when we have zoning and land use policies that allow developers and landowners to clear that zone, then you're really setting something up to try and replace what was there by nature that's a protective measure. And so if we can modify those zoning and land use policies that prohibit or require restoration or don't allow us to destroy that natural barrier, that first line of defense, that would go a long way, right? That would really go a long way. And it is the policy that drives everything. So all of that pre-designed policy, getting nature-based solutions in place, and it's really about water management. And at Jacobs, we have a one water philosophy. So when we look at water, we're looking at all water, whether it's seawater, whether it's aquifer and groundwater, whether it's rainwater, and how are we managing water holistically? And so, you know, kind of modernizing some of that policy in a city government, or particularly when you're dealing with a rebuild. And I was very moved by your talk earlier, and I thought, gosh, I would love to go work with those folks because we're doing a lot of recovery and rebuild work. And honestly, it takes a lot of courage from the government, the state and local government, to say we're going to change our policy and governance for the rebuild. Because in many communities, and I was just in Lahaina for the rebuild after the wildfires, there has to be a political appetite to have the courage to say, we're going to build back differently versus we're going to expedite the rebuild and make it as fast and easy as possible. Those are two very, very different things.
Thank you very much for your questions, for engaging. Thank you, Hollie and Georgia, for your expertise. Unfortunately, the time is up for our session, but please, a round of applause for our panelists today. Thanks.